The sound of a tent zipper at 24,500 feet is usually the sound of hope. In the thin, freezing air of the Himalayas, it means movement, it means life, it means another day of fighting gravity. But on the morning of May 21, 2024, on the steep icy face of Lhotse, the fourth highest mountain on Earth, and the darker, sharper sister of Mount Everest, that sound was the prelude to a devastating, absolute silence. Imagine standing there. You are a Sherpa guide. The wind is whipping around you, carrying temperatures that can freeze exposed skin in minutes. You approach a small, yellow tent anchored precariously to the ice at Camp 3. Inside lies Gabriel Viorel Tabara. He is 48 years old, a Romanian climber with a veteran's experience and a dreamer's heart. He isn't lost in a blizzard. He hasn't fallen into a crevasse. He is right there, safe inside his nylon shelter. You call his name, no answer. You unzip the door, expecting to see him preparing his gear, perhaps sluggish from the altitude, but moving. Instead, you find him still. Disturbingly still. There is no violence here, no blood, no chaotic struggle. It looks like sleep, but at this altitude, sleep is the cousin of death. Gabriel is gone. This is the terrifying reality of high-altitude mountaineering that few talk about. We are obsessed with the dramatic falls and the catastrophic avalanches, but the mountain's most effective weapon is silence. It is the slow, invisible shutdown of the human machine. Gabriel Tabara was attempting to climb Lhotse without the aid of supplemental oxygen, a stylistic choice that purists call by fair means, but physiologists call a flirtation with the impossible. He wanted to feel the raw atmosphere of the planet's ceiling, and in return, the atmosphere quietly claimed him. Why does a man, nearly half a century old, with a life and family back in Romania, choose to walk willingly into a place where human life is biologically unsustainable? What happens in the human brain when oxygen drops 2 levels so low that reality begins to warp? This isn't just a story about a tragedy on the slopes of the Himalayas. It is an investigation into the limits of human ambition and the precise, cold mechanics of the death zone. Today, we are going to dissect the final hours of Gabriel Viorel Tabara. We will peel back the layers of the Makalu adventure expedition and look the silent killer in the eye. We will walk the timeline, analyze the medical reality, and confront the brutal ethics of high-altitude survival. Welcome to Ben's Stories. Before we ascend into the thin air, make sure you are subscribed and have notifications turned on. You need to hear what happens next. Because on the mountain, what you don't know will kill you. To understand why Gabriel Viorel Tabara died, we must first understand who he was, and more importantly, where he was. In the world of high-altitude mountaineering, there is a tendency to group all climbers into 2 categories: the elite superhumans who race up mountains in record time, and the wealthy tourists who are dragged up by Sherpas. Gabriel didn't fit neatly into either box. He was 48 years old. He was Romanian. He was a man of experience, not a novice seeking a selfie. This wasn't a midlife crisis. This was a calculated pursuit of a lifelong passion. Gabriel had signed up with the expedition organizer Makalu Adventure. His objective was Lhotse. Standing at 8,516 meters, 27,940 feet, Lhotse is the 4th highest mountain in the world. But to call it just the 4th highest is to do it a disservice. It is connected to Mount Everest by the South Col, meaning climbers share the same route for most of the journey through the treacherous Khumbu icefall, up the western Khum, and onto the precipitous Lhotse face. But while Everest gets the glory, Lhotse gets the steepness. The final couloir is a narrow vertical nightmare of rock and ice. But Gabriel had added a variable to this equation that changed everything. He was attempting to climb without supplemental oxygen. In the climbing community, climbing no O2 is the gold standard of purity. It is man against the mountain, unadulterated. But biologically speaking, it is a game of Russian roulette where you add a bullet to the chamber with every 100 meters you ascend. By choosing to forego the mask, Gabriel wasn't just climbing a mountain. He was entering a physiological war zone without armor. This brings us to the antagonist of our story. It isn't a yeti, it isn't an avalanche, and it isn't even the cold. The enemy is the air itself, or rather, the lack of it. We need to talk about the death zone. You've heard the term, but let's strip away the Hollywood glamour and look at the medical reality. Let us break down exactly what was happening to Gabriel's body and the body of anyone who dares to tread this high on a cellular level. This is where the story shifts from adventure to biology. When you take a breath at sea level, your hemoglobin, the red blood cells responsible for transport, grabs oxygen molecules and rushes them to your brain, heart, and muscles. You operate at near 100% saturation. At Camp 3, without bottled oxygen, that saturation plummets. Your body enters a state of hypoxia. The first thing to go is your judgment. The brain is an energy hog. It consumes 20% of your body's oxygen. When you starve it, it begins to shut down non-essential functions. Complex reasoning vanishes. Emotional regulation disappears. You might feel an odd sense of euphoria, a drunk-like state where everything seems fine, even as you are slowly dying. This is the insidious trap of the high Himalayas. You don't always feel pain when you are in danger. Sometimes, you feel peaceful. But while the brain is fogging over, the rest of the body is fighting a losing battle against fluid dynamics. The two greatest killers at this altitude are HAPE, high-altitude pulmonary edema, and HACE, high-altitude cerebral edema. HAPE is essentially drowning from the inside out. In a desperate attempt to grab more oxygen, your pulmonary arteries constrict, increasing pressure in the lungs. This pressure forces fluid from your blood vessels to leak into the tiny air sacs alveoli meant for air. Instead of breathing oxygen, you start breathing your own plasma. You start coughing a dry, hacking cough at first, which eventually brings up pink, frothy sputum. It is a terrifying, rattling death. HACE is even more nightmarish. The same pressure leak happens, but in the brain. The brain swells, pushing against the skull. This leads to ataxia, the loss of muscle coordination. You stumble. You can't walk in a straight line. You hallucinate. Climbers with HACE have been known to talk to invisible friends or believe they are back in their childhood homes. Eventually, the brainstem is compressed and the lights go out. Gabriel was a veteran. He knew these risks, so why was he there? Why do smart men put themselves in the path of such biological destruction? This is where we encounter the psychological phenomenon known as summit fever, or the sunk cost fallacy. Imagine you have trained for 2 years. The logic of the lower world dictates that if you feel tired or unwell, you stop. But the logic of the mountain is inverted. The drive to justify the suffering, the money, and the time becomes a powerful, blinding force. It overrides the survival instinct. The mountain whispers to you, just one more day, just one more camp. You can rest when you get to the top. By May 21st, the 2024 season was already proving to be difficult. The weather windows were tight, the crowds were surging. On Lhotse and Everest, traffic jams on the fixed ropes mean you are standing still, burning energy, exposed to the wind, waiting for the person in front of you to move. For a climber on bottled oxygen, a delay is a nuisance, a waste of gas. For a climber without oxygen, like Gabriel, a delay is fatal. Every minute spent standing still at 7,400 meters is a minute your body is cannibalizing itself. Gabriel had reached Camp 3. This is a terrifying place to camp. Unlike Camp 1 or 2, which are located in the relatively flat western Camp, Camp 3 is carved directly into the ice wall of the Lhotse face. You have to keep your crampons on just to go to the bathroom. If you slip outside your tent without being clipped in, you slide 1,000 meters to your death. It is a place of constant low-level anxiety. In this hostile, vertical freezer, Gabriel Viorel Tabara settled into his tent. He was preparing for the final push, or perhaps recovering from an acclimatization rotation. The details of his internal state remain locked in his mind, but we can reconstruct the scenario. He was likely exhausted. His blood was thickening, turning into a sludge that the heart struggled to pump, a natural defense mechanism to carry more oxygen that backfires by causing clots and strokes. He was alone in his experience, even surrounded by other tents. High-altitude climbing is a deeply solitary act. You are trapped inside your down suit, trapped inside your hood, trapped inside your own hypoxia-starved mind. The stage was set. The enemy, the thin, brutal atmosphere, was present in the tent with him. It didn't need to attack him. It just needed to wait. As the sun dipped below the jagged horizon of the Himalayas on the eve of May 21st, the temperature plummeted, and the air grew still. Gabriel closed his eyes, perhaps thinking he just needed a few hours of sleep before the next effort. He didn't know it, but the mechanism of his demise had already been engaged. The setup was complete. The turning point, that invisible moment where survival becomes impossible, was fast approaching. To pinpoint the exact moment Gabriel Viorel Tabara died, we cannot look at a watch. At 7,400 meters, time is not measured in minutes or seconds. It is measured in breaths. It is measured in the slow, rhythmic decay of the human cell. However, to understand why he died, we must reconstruct the timeline of the 24 hours leading up to the discovery of his body. We have to look for the point of no return. In most disaster stories, the turning point is loud. A rope snaps, a storm hits, a rock falls. But in the case of a climber found inside their tent, the turning point is almost always silent. It is a subtle, internal shift where the body's metabolic math stops adding up. Let's go back to the afternoon of May 20th, 16 o'clock hours. Gabriel arrives at Camp 3. Climbers describe the arrival at Camp 3 on the Lhotse face as one of the most physically draining experiences of their lives. You have just ascended the steep, blue ice of the Lhotse face. Your calves are burning from front-pointing your crampons for hours. For a climber using supplemental oxygen, this is hard. For Gabriel, climbing no O2, this is agony. Every step requires 10 breaths. His heart rate is likely sitting at 140 beats per minute, not while running, but while standing still. When he unzips that tent, he faces the first critical test of survival: hydration. This is the unglamorous reality of the death zone. To survive, you must drink 4 to 5 liters of water a day. But water doesn't exist here. Only ice. You have to shovel snow into a pot, light a stove which struggles to burn in the thin air, and wait. This is often where the first fatal mistake is made. It's called altitude lassitude. You are so tired that the simple act of melting snow feels like lifting a car. So, you tell yourself, I'll do it later. I'll just rest my eyes for a minute. If Gabriel skipped this hydration step because of exhaustion, his blood already thickening from the altitude would have turned into a substance resembling motor oil. This puts immense strain on the heart. 20 o'clock hours. Night falls over the Himalayas. The temperature drops to minus 30 degrees Celsius, menos 22. If, inside the tent, it is marginally warmer, but the air is stagnant. Here, the turning point likely began with a physiological phenomenon known as Cheyne-Stokes respiration. It is terrifying to witness. As the climber falls asleep, the CO2 levels in their blood drop. The brain, confused by the chemistry, stops the breathing reflex. The climber stops breathing entirely for 10, 15, sometimes 20 seconds. Then, the survival instinct kicks in, and they wake up gasping, drowning in air that holds no oxygen. This creates a cycle of panic and exhaustion. You cannot sleep, but you cannot stay awake. You are trapped in a twilight state of delirium. For Gabriel, without the steady hiss of an oxygen mask to regulate his intake, this night would have been a battle for every single molecule of air. 2 o'clock hours. This is the witching hour on Everest and Lhotse. Around them, other tents are buzzing with activity. Headlamps are flickering on. Climbers are gearing up for their summit push. The crunch of crampons on ice begins. This is the moment of truth. This is the psychological turning point. Usually, if a climber is going for the summit, they are moving by now. If they are boarding, they are preparing to descend at first light. But Gabriel's tent remains zipped. Did he try to move? Did he sit up, attempt to put on his boots, and find that his limbs wouldn't obey? This brings us to the concept of the silent killer, HACE, high-altitude cerebral edema. As the brain swells, apathy sets in. This is the most dangerous symptom. It's not pain, it's a total lack of caring. A climber with HACE doesn't feel like they are dying. They feel like they just want to stay in their sleeping bag. The urgency to survive is chemically erased from the brain. If Gabriel reached this state, the decision to just sleep a little longer was not a choice. It was a sentence. 8 o'clock hours. The sun hits the Lhotse face. This creates a cruel paradox. The air temperature is freezing, but the radiation from the sun, reflecting off the white snow, turns the inside of a tent into a microwave. Temperatures inside the nylon can soar to 30 degrees Celsius, 86 degrees Fahrenheit or more. If Gabriel was still alive at this point, but incapacitated, this heat would have accelerated his dehydration. He would be cooking inside his suit, unable to unzip the door, drifting in and out of consciousness. The mountain was no longer fighting him with cold, it was killing him with heat and thirst. 11 o'clock hours, the timeline terminates here. His Sherpa guide, perhaps checking on him for the summit rotation or noticing the lack of movement, opens the tent. What they found was not a man struggling. They found a man who had simply ... stopped. The turning point wasn't a dramatic fall. It was the moment likely hours earlier. In the dark where his body, demand for oxygen, finally outstripped the meager supply the atmosphere could provide. His heart, trying to pump sludge through constricted veins, simply couldn't squeeze one more time. There is a grim saying among high-altitude doctors, you do die because you can't get up. You can't get up because you are already dying. Gabriel didn't miss a step. He didn't slip. He simply ran out of biological runway. The fair means approach climbing without oxygen had exacted the ultimate price. The turning point was the realization that at 7,400 meters, the human body is not a climber. It is a dying organism fighting a losing war against physics. And on the morning of May 21st, physics won. There is a disturbing paradox that haunts the high Himalayas. You are never more alone than when you are surrounded by people. When we think of a mountain tragedy, we imagine a lone figure lost in a blinding white void, miles from civilization. But Gabriel Viorel Tabara did not die in the wilderness. He died in a campsite. Camp 3 is a village. It is a cluster of tents perched on an ice shelf, occupied by dozens of climbers, Sherpas, and support staff. On the morning of May 21st, there were likely radios crackling, stoves hissing, and boots crunching on snow just feet away from Gabriel's head. A thin sheet of yellow nylon was the only thing separating the living from the dying. This brings us to the most terrifying aspect of the death zone, the moral dilemma. In civilized society, if you see a man collapsing or unresponsive, the social contract dictates that you stop. You call 911, you administer CPR, you hope. But above 7,000 meters, the social contract evaporates. It is replaced by the ruthless arithmetic of triage. To understand the horror of Gabriel's situation, you have to understand the physics of a rescue at Camp 3. Many viewers ask, why didn't they just carry him down? Or why didn't a helicopter pick him up? Let's look at the helicopter fallacy first. The air at Camp 3 is so thin that the rotors of a standard helicopter cannot generate enough lift to hover, let alone land or take off with the added weight of a passenger. While high-altitude rescue pilots are performing miracles these days, landing on the 45-degree slope of the Lhotse face to extract a motionless body is a suicide mission. The margin for error is zero. So, that leaves a ground rescue. To carry an incapacitated adult male dead weight down the Lhotse face requires a team of 6 to 10 fresh, strong Sherpas. They would need to rig complex pulley systems, maneuvering a sled down a wall of blue ice while clipping and unclipping from safety lines, all while managing their own hypoxia. But here is the grim reality. At Camp 3, there are no fresh Sherpas. Everyone is operating at their limit. To ask a team to abort their summit push, burn their oxygen reserves, and risk their lives to carry down a man who might already be past the point of no return, is an impossible ask. It is a decision that weighs the life of one against the lives of 6. This creates a zone of ethical blindness. Climbers passing a closed tent assume the person inside is sleeping. They have to. If they stopped to check every zipped tent, they would never reach the summit, and they would likely run out of oxygen themselves. Ignorance isn't just bliss, it is a survival strategy. Did Gabriel call out? Did he unzip the door and wave? We will likely never know. But medical science gives us a chilling window into what was happening inside his mind, and it suggests that he may not have wanted to call out at all. This brings us to the horror of the mind, the hallucinations. When HACE, high-altitude cerebral edema, sets in, the brain does not just shut down, it misfires. The swelling presses against the temporal lobes, the centers of memory and auditory processing. This triggers the third man factor. Climbers on the brink of death often report the sensation of a benevolent presence. They are not alone. A companion is walking with them, or sitting in the tent with them. In the final hours, Gabriel might have been having a pleasant conversation with a hallucination of his wife, or a childhood friend. The brain, in its final act of mercy, floods the system with endorphins. The terror of the situation is replaced by a strange, narcotic calm. He may have looked at his frozen hands and seen them as warm and functional. He may have felt the biting cold as a comforting heat. This leads to the most gruesome phenomenon seen in hypothermia cases: paradoxical undressing. While we don't have confirmation that Gabriel did this, it is a common specter in these deaths. As the body's core temperature drops, the hypothalamus, the brain's thermostat, malfunctions. It sends a false signal that the body is overheating. Simultaneously, the muscles controlling the blood vessels in the extremities, which have been constricted to save heat, suddenly relax. Hot blood from the core rushes to the frozen skin. The victim, in the moments before death, feels a sudden, burning hot flash. They begin to tear off their clothes. They unzip their down suits. They remove their gloves. In the most hostile environment on Earth, they strip down, convinced they are burning up, only to accelerate their own freezing. It is a final, cruel trick of the biology. If Gabriel remained in his sleeping bag, fully clothed, he was spared this final indignity, but the isolation remains the central tragedy. Imagine the timeline again. Les 11 a.m. The sun is high. The expedition team realizes something is wrong. The moral dilemma shifts from, can we save him, to what do we do with him? This is the hardest conversation in mountaineering. Once a climber is confirmed dead, they instantly transition from a teammate to a logistic nightmare. A body freezes solid very quickly. It becomes an immovable object, a statue of ice weighing 200 pounds. The team leader at base camp, communicating via radio, has to make the call. Do we risk lives to bring the body down for the family, or do we leave him there? On Everest and Lhotse, the answer is almost always the latter. The mountain is a graveyard not because climbers are heartless, but because they are human. They are too weak to be undertakers. Gabriel Viorel Tabara was a man who loved the mountains. He respected them, but the mountain does not respect you back. It is indifferent. As he lay there in Camp 3, the dilemma wasn't his anymore. His struggle was over. The dilemma passed to the living, the people who had to zip that tent back up, turn around, and walk away. They had to leave him, not out of malice, but out of necessity. They had to leave him to the wind, to the ice, and to the eternal silence of the stratosphere. The tent became his coffin. Camp the Third became his graveyard. And this is where the haunting realization settles in for us, the viewers who look at these mountains as playgrounds for glory. But every high-altitude camp is built on a foundation of compromise. Every climber who steps over a body to reach the summit loses a piece of their humanity to gain a piece of the sky. Gabriel was no longer a climber. He was now part of the geography, a warning, a marker. But the story doesn't end with his death. The aftermath, the legacy of that yellow tent on the Lhotse face, forces us to ask the final, difficult questions about why we do this at all. Why do we seek places that want to kill us? And what is the value of a life measured against the height of a peak? The sun sets on May 21, 2024. The wind picks up again on the Lhotse face, rattling the nylon fabric of a yellow tent at Camp 3. Inside, Gabriel Viorel Tabara remains exactly where he was found. This is the grim finality of the Himalayas. In any other environment, on Earth a jungle, a desert, the middle of the ocean, we go to extraordinary lengths to recover our dead. We believe in closure. We believe in a burial. But here, at the jagged edge of the stratosphere, those human rituals collide with a wall of physics. Gabriel's body is likely still there, and if history is any indicator, it may remain there for years, perhaps decades. He has joined the silent legion of the open-air graveyard, You have probably heard of Green Boots, the Indian climber, Suang Palger, who lay in a limestone cave on Everest for 20 years, his neon green boots serving as a grim way marker for passing climbers. You may know of Sleeping Beauty, Frances Arsantive, who became a tragic landmark until she was eventually moved. Gabriel Tabara is now part of this haunting geography. Why? It is not a lack of money, and it is certainly not a lack of respect. It is the brutal economics of energy. To bring a body down from 7,400 meters is an operation that rivals a military extraction. It requires a team of 6 to 10 elite Sherpas, putting their own lives on the line, navigating the treacherous Khumbu icefall with a sled that acts like a runaway anchor. It costs tens of thousands of dollars, but the currency that matters most is human life. Is it ethical to ask 6 living men to risk making their children orphans just to retrieve a shell that no longer holds a soul? Most families, when faced with this impossible calculus, choose to let their loved ones remain. They choose to let the mountain be the tomb. They ask the Sherpas to cut the tent ropes, to cover the body with snow, or to gently push it into a crevasse, returning the climber to the deep ice from which the mountain is made. This reality forces us to look in the mirror. What does Gabriel's death tell us about the modern state of adventure? We live in an era where we believe we have conquered nature. We have heated jackets, satellite phones, and accurate weather forecasting. We have commercialized the roof of the world. You can buy a ticket to the top of Everest or Lhotse, just like you buy a ticket to a cruise. But Gabriel's story is a violent check on that arrogance. He was not a tourist. He was a climber. He attempted Lhotse by fair means, without supplemental oxygen. He wanted to meet the mountain on its own terms, without the artificial buffer of bottled air. It was a noble pursuit of purity, but the mountain does not care about nobility. The mountain does not care about fair. The mountain is a geological, uncaring beast that operates on the laws of pressure and temperature. When you strip away the oxygen mask, you are stripping away the modern world. You are stepping back into a primal state where the human body is nothing more than a fragile bag of water and carbon, utterly unequipped for the environment it is trying to conquer. Gabriel's yellow tent at Camp 3 is now a monument. It is a monument to the thin line between glory and tragedy. Every climber who passes that tent in the future on their way to the summit of Lhotse or traversing towards Everest will have to look at it. They will see the yellow nylon flapping in the wind. They will know what is inside, and for a brief second, the summit fever will break. The adrenaline will fade, and they will feel a cold shiver that has nothing to do with the temperature. They will realize that they are walking through a graveyard. They will realize that the only difference between them and the man in the tent is a few percentage points of oxygen saturation, a lucky break in the weather, or a single decision to turn around 10 minutes earlier. The tragedy of the Makalu adventure expedition is not just that a man died, it is that his death was almost routine. In the 2024 season alone, the Himalayas claimed multiple lives. We are becoming desensitized to it. We scroll past the headlines, another climber dies. We shrug, but we must not shrug. We must remember that Gabriel Viorel Tabara was a father, a friend, a man with a 48-year story that ended in a frozen silence. His ambition was beautiful, but the price was absolute. The death zone is not a place for humans. We are visitors there, unwelcome visitors, and sometimes, the host decides to keep us. Gabriel went looking for the peak of the world. He found eternity instead. This has been a Ben Stories investigation. We dig into the darkest corners of exploration, history, and the human condition because we believe that the truth, no matter how cold, is worth finding. We don't just tell you what happened, we want to understand why. If this story made your heart race, if it made you rethink the limits of human ambition, then you are in the right place. Hit that subscribe button right now. Do not just watch, join us. Turn on the notification bell so you are the first to know when we release our next deep dive into the unknown. We have files on the K2 bottleneck disaster and the Dyatlov Pass incident that we are opening soon, and you do not want to miss them. Now I want to hear from you. I want you to go to the comments section below and answer this question honestly. No judgment, just instinct. Imagine you are at Camp 3, you are exhausted. The summit is just 1,000 meters away, the dream of a lifetime. But you are beginning to feel the fog of hypoxia. Do you push for the glory, knowing you might not come back? Or do you turn around and live with the what if for the rest of your life? Would you choose the glory or the ghost? Let me know below. I'll be reading the comments. Until next time, stay safe and respect the silence.